I would like to welcome everyone to our second session for the security track. For those of you who were in for the first session, it was a great presentation around collaboration and being proactive. And now I'm delighted to get to introduce somebody I've seen on stage for years, but have never actually gotten to meet. Coming to the stage is Frank Abagnale and Ori Eisen. I don't know that Frank needs any introduction if you have seen the movie or the play. It's wonderful. And one of the things that I think he's really led with is taking the experience that he had and now using it for a greater good to educate industry and government on how we could be harder targets in security. So with that, Frank?
Thank you. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. As you know, normally when I walk up to the podium, it is to speak about fraud, cybercrime, identity theft, and embezzlement and things of that nature. As a matter of fact, this is Cyber Awareness Month, so every October I'm out 5 days a week speaking. So I started out at Google on Monday and ended up in Hawaii the rest of the week and speaking over there, and came in last night to speak here. However, I was here last year and we talked about identity theft, and this year, Money 2020 asked me if I'd come back and really just talk about my life, something a little different. As many of you know, I've had a great writer write a book about my life, had a great film director make a movie about my life, had a great Broadway musical team make a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical about my life, and of course a popular show on TV, White Collar, for 4 years, created around my life. Most of those very creative people have actually never met me personally, but obviously they've enjoyed telling my story from their point of view, so that Money 2020 asked me if I'd tell you the story from my point of view. I was raised just north of New York City in Westchester County, New York, in a little town called Bronxville. I was actually one of 4 children in the family, the so-called middle child of the 4. I was educated there by the Christian Brothers of Ireland in a private Catholic school called Iona in New Rochelle, New York, where I went to school from kindergarten to high school. By the time I had reached the age of 16 in the 10th grade, my parents, after 22 years of marriage one day, had decided to get a divorce. Unlike most divorces where the children were usually the first to know, my parents were very good about keeping that a secret. I remember being in the 10th grade when the father walked in the classroom and asked a brother to excuse me from class. When I came out in the hallway, the father handed me my books and told me that one of the brothers would drive me to the county seat in White Plains, New York, where I would meet my parents and they would explain what was going on. I remember the brother dropped me at the steps of a big stone building, told me to go on up the steps. My parents would be waiting for me in the lobby. I remember climbing the steps, seeing a sign on the building that said family court, but I really didn't understand what that meant. When I arrived in the lobby, my parents were not there, but I was ushered into the back of an immense courtroom where my parents were standing before a judge. I couldn't hear what the judge was saying, nor my parents' response. But eventually the judge saw me at the back of the room and motioned me to approach the bench, so I walked up to stand in between my parents. I remember distinctly that the judge never looked at me. He never acknowledged I was standing there. He just read from his papers and said that my parents were getting a divorce. And because I was 16 years of age, I would need to tell the court which parent I chose to live with. I started to cry, so I turned and ran out of the courtroom. Judge called for a 10-minute recess, but by the time my parents got outside, I was gone. My mother never saw me again for about 7 years until I was a young adult. Contrary to the movie, my father never saw me or ever spoke to me again. In the mid-1960s, running away was a very popular thing for young people. A lot of them got caught up in Haight-Ashbury, the hippie scene, the drug scene. Instead, I took a few belongings from my home, packed them in a bag, boarded what was then the New Haven and Hartford Railroad for the short train ride down to Grand Central Terminal in New York. My father did own a stationery store, but actually in Manhattan, located on the corner of 40th and Madison. Like all of us, we had to work in that store. So from the time I was about 13, I made deliveries for my dad on a bicycle. I knew the city very well, so naturally I started looking for the same type of work. There were a lot of signs on the windows: stock boy, delivery boy, part-time. I'd walk in and apply. So tell me, young man, how old are you? 16. How far did you go in high school? 10th grade. I'll hire you. I went to work for a small amount of money, a few hours a day, but I soon realized I couldn't support myself on that amount of money. I also realized that as long as people believed I was 16 years old, they weren't going to pay me any more money. At 16, I was 6 foot tall. I've always had a little gray hair. My friends used to say that once a week when we wore a suit from mass, I looked more like a teacher than a student. So I decided to lie about my age. In New York, we had a driver's license at 16. Back then, they didn't have a photo on it, just an IBM card. So I altered just one digit of my date of birth. I was actually born in April of 1948, but I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3, and that made me 10 years older, or 26 years old. I walked around applying for the same type of work. People gave me a little more money, a few more hours, but even then it was very difficult to make ends meet. One of the few things I had taken when I left home was a checkbook. My father had opened a checking account for me at a small community bank in Mount Vernon, New York. I had a little money in that account, so every so often I'd write a check to supplement my income. $20, $25, funds were there, checks were good. But it was my friends, my peers, who would say to me, you know, you're the only guy I know walks into a bank in the middle of Manhattan. You have no account there. You don't know a soul. You talk to somebody behind a desk, and they okay your check. Oh, well, my checks are good. I walked in that bank. They wouldn't touch my check. You walk in, they don't bat an eye. Years later, reporters would say that that was my upbringing, mannerisms, dress, appearance, speech, whatever it was very easy to do. So consequently, when the money ran out, I kept writing those checks. Of course, the checks started to bounce. Police started looking for me as a runaway. So I thought maybe it was a good time to start thinking about leaving New York City. But I was quite apprehensive about going to Chicago, Miami, wondered if they'd cash a New York check on a New York driver's license in Miami as quickly as they did in Manhattan. I was walking up 42nd Street one afternoon, about 5 o'clock in the evening, 16 years old, pondering all of these things when I started to approach the front door of an old hotel that used to be there called the Commodore Hotel, now the Grand Hyatt. Just as I was about to get to the front door of the hotel, out stepped an Eastern Airline flight crew onto the sidewalk. Couldn't help but notice the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, about 3 or 4 flight attendants dragging their bags to the curb to load them in the van to take them to the airport. As they were loading the van, I thought to myself, that's it. If I could pose as a pilot, I could travel all over the world for free. I probably could get just about anybody, anywhere, to cash a check for me. So I walked up the street a little further to 42nd and Park. I went to cross over. I heard a huge helicopter, so I looked up and there was New York Airways landing on the roof of the Pan Am building. Pan Am, the nation's flag carrier, the airline that flew around the world. I thought, what a perfect airline to use. So the next day I placed a phone call to the executive corporate offices of Pan Am. When the switchboard was ringing, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. When they answered, Pan American Airlines, good morning, could I help you? Yes, ma'am. I'd like to speak to somebody in the purchasing department. Purchasing? One moment. The clerk came on and said, yes, American Airlines, my name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco. Been with the company about 7 years. Never had anything like this come up before. What's the problem? We flew a trip in here yesterday. We're going out today. Yesterday I sent my uniform out through the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and the cleaner say they can't find it. Yeah, I'm with the flight in about 4 hours. No uniform. Do you have a spare uniform? Certainly, back home in San Francisco, but I never get it here in time for my flight. You understand this will cost you the price of a uniform? Well, I understand. Hold on, I'll be right back. And he came back and said, my supervisor says you need to go down to the Well-Built Uniform Company on Fifth Avenue. They're our supplier. I'll call them and let them know you're on the way. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to know, so I went down to the Well-Built Uniform Company. Little fella, Mr. Rosen, fitted me out in the uniform. They were black gabardine, the 3 gold stripes on the arm, the gray hair. I certainly looked old enough to be the pilot. When it was all done, I said, how much do I owe you? The uniform's $286. I said, no problem, I'll write you a check. No, we can't take any checks. Oh, well, then I'll just pay you cash. No, we can't accept cash. You need to fill out this computer card. Then in these boxes, you put your employee number. Then you bill this back under uniform allowance. Comes out of your next Pan Am paycheck. Well, that's even better. Go ahead and do that. New York had 2 airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy. Kennedy was about 50 minutes from Manhattan. LaGuardia was 20, so LaGuardia being the closer of the 2, that's where I went. I spent most of the morning walking around LaGuardia in the uniform, trying to figure out now that I had the uniform, how the hell do you get on these planes? Well, I got a little hungry about lunchtime, so I walked in the luncheonette, Sat down at the counter on the stool and ordered a sandwich. Moments later, a TWA crew walked in. Flight attendant sat in the booth, but the pilots up at the counter on either side of me, captain right next to me. Now, back before deregulation of the airlines, airline people thought of themselves as just one big family. So they didn't hesitate a moment to talk to each other, and the captain kind of leaned over. "Hey, young man, how's Pan Am doing?" "Doing just fine, Captain." "Tell me, what's Pan Am doing out here at LaGuardia?" "Pan Am doesn't fly into LaGuardia, they only fly into Kennedy." Well, I picked up on that right away. Yeah, we came into Kennedy, had a short layover, came over to visit some friends. Matter of fact, I'm on my way back to Kennedy now. So tell me, young man, what type of equipment are you on? Now, airline people have a lot of jargon for things, and one of them is they never call a plane or an aircraft. They call it equipment. What type of equipment you're on meant what type of plane do you fly. Back then, the DC-8 to 707. Of course, I didn't know that, and I thought, what type of equipment am I on? Only equipment I'm on is this stool. They must mean what type of equipment is on the planes I fly. So I thought, well, they got the wings, they got the engine. They always had a sticker on the engine, who manufactured the engine. So I said, yes, General Electric. All three pilots kind of just stopped eating and leaned over. Captain said, "Oh, really? What do you fly, washing machines?" I knew I said the wrong thing. Out the door I went. Everybody had an airline ID card, plastic, laminated card, much like a driver's license today. Yet without the ID card, the uniform was worthless. I went back to Manhattan pretty discouraged, thinking, where would I come up with a Pan American airline corporate ID? I was sitting in a hotel room. I noticed a big, thick Manhattan Yellow Pages. So I pulled them down on the bed, flipped them open, and looked under the word identification. There were 3 or 4 pages of companies who made convention badges, metal badges, plastic badges, police badges, fire badges. Started to call around, and finally one company said, "Listen, most of those airline IDs manufactured by Polaroid, 3M company. Need to call one of them." Finally got the 3M company on the phone in Manhattan. "Yeah, we manufacture Pan Am's identification system, along with a number of other carriers." "How come?" So I tell you, I'm a purchasing officer for a major U.S. carrier. I'm in New York just for the day. We're getting ready to expand our routes, hire a lot of new employees, go to a formal ID. We're very impressed with the Pan Am format. Wondered if I came by your office this afternoon, briefly, we could discuss quantity and price. By all means, come on by. So I went by dressed in a suit, and the sales rep opened the book. Yeah, we do Braniff, National, Eastern, Pan Am, Pan Am. "We like this Pan Am format. Wonder if you have a sample I could bring back." "Sure, I'll be right back." Excuse me. And he brought me back a 5x7 glossy piece of paper with a picture of an ID card blown up in the middle of it. Someone else's picture in the picture, John Doe for a name, and in bold red ink across the front, "This is a sample only." I said, "No, I'm afraid this won't do." "You know, I need to bring back an actual physical card. And by the way, what is all this equipment on the floor?" And we don't just sell this card. We sell the system, camera, laminator. So we have to buy all this? Absolutely. But tell you what, since we have to buy it all, why don't you just demonstrate how it works and use me? Fine, have a seat right here. Took my picture, made up the card, and out the door I went. As I was going down the elevator, I was studying the card. It had a blue border across the top, about 1/4 of an inch in Pan Am's color blue, but not a single thing on the card said Pan Am. No logo, no insignia, no company name. This was a plastic card, like a credit card. Couldn't type on it, couldn't write on it, couldn't print on it. Discouraged, I put it in my pocket, headed back to the hotel. As I was walking back, I noticed that I had passed a hobby shop, so I turned around and walked back. "Excuse me, sir, I see you sell a lot of models here. You sell models of commercial jetliners?" "Sure, over there." And I bought a model of a Pan Am 707 cargo jet for about $2.40, took it back to my room, opened the box, threw all the parts out. But there at the bottom of the box was a sheet of decals that went on the model. And when soaked in a glass of water, the little Pan Am blue logo globe that would have went on the tail of the plastic plane went perfect up at the top of the plastic card. And the word Pan Am and the special styling or graphics that would have went on the fuselage went perfect across the top of the card. And the clear decal on the laminated plastic made a beautiful identification card. Pan Am says they estimate that between the ages of 16 and 18, I flew more than 1 million miles for free, boarded more than 260 commercial aircraft in more than 26 countries around the world. Pan Am says, keep in mind that though Frank Abagnale did in fact pose as one of our pilots for a long extended period of time, he never once stepped on board one of our aircraft. That's true. I never flew on Pan Am because I was afraid someone might say to me, I'm based in San Francisco, been out there 16 years. I don't recall ever meeting you before. Or someone might say, your ID card is not exactly like my ID card. So instead, I flew on everyone else. If I wanted to go somewhere, I literally just walked out to the airport and looked on the board, United Flight 800 to Chicago. Then I'd go downstairs to the door marked United Operations and walk in. The operations clerk, "Hey, Pan Am, we do for you." So I wonder if the jump seats open on 800, needed to get to Chicago. Jump seats open, I'd get a pink slip pass. I'd give my ID, write me out a pass. I'd walk out, hand it to the flight attendant. She'd open the door to the cockpit. They had the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and a seat behind the captain, called the jump seat, where pilots deadhead on company time. Now, because pilots love to talk shop, once you picked up that jargon, it was the same conversation over and over and over. So I just step on board, even Jim Bob Davis be riding to Chicago. On the taxi out, always the same question. "So Bob, how long you been with Pan Am?" "Been flying about 7 years." "What position you fly?" "Right seat," which is airline terminology for a co-pilot. "What type of equipment are you on?" Had that one down. Perfect. Matter of fact, whatever they flew, I didn't fly. So I had no problems with that. When I arrived in Chicago, I'd go by the Pan Am ticket counter, but just enough to get the attention of the passenger service rep. "Sir, haven't laid over here in over a year. Is there a Parma House Hilton downtown? Catch a crew bus lower level, door 3 up." I'd go down to Parma House Hilton, walk in, and on the corner of the registration desk with a little sign that says Airline Cruise. That was a 3-ring binder. You signed in, referenced your flight number, showed your ID. They'd give me a key. I'd stay 2 or 3 days, and Pan Am would be direct billed for my room and my meals. As you know, I went on to impersonate a doctor in a Georgia hospital for a while. I passed the state bar exams in the state of Louisiana. I went to work for Attorney General P.F. Grimion in the civil division of his state court, where I spent a year practicing law in that court. On both the job as the doctor and the lawyer, no one ever doubted for a second that I was neither. It was I who resigned on my own and left. Of course, like any criminal, sooner or later you get caught, and I was no exception to that rule. I was actually arrested just once in my life, at the age of 21, by the French police in a small town in southern France called Montpellier. The French police were arresting me on an Interpol warrant issued by the Swedish police, who were looking for me for forgery in Sweden, but believed that I was residing in France. When the French authorities took me into custody on the Swedish warrant, they realized I'd forged checks all over France, so they refused to honor the warrant and my request for extradition. They later convicted me of forgery and sent me to prison. I served my time in a place called the Maison d'Arrêt, the house of arrest, in a small town in southern France called Perpignan. Steven Spielberg told Barbara Walters it was extremely important to me to go back to that prison, back to the exact cell he was in, and reconstruct it according to the logbooks during his stay there, which he said, to my amazement, that was a blanket on the floor, no mattress, a hole in the floor to go to the bathroom, no plumbing, no electricity. He said, I entered the prison at 198 pounds according to their logbooks. I left the prison at 109 pounds. When my sentence was over, I was extradited to Sweden, where I was later convicted of forgery in a Swedish court of law and sent to a Swedish penitentiary in Malmo, Sweden. When my prison term was up in Sweden, U.S. federal authorities took custody of me, returned me to the United States. Eventually, a United States federal judge would sentence me to 12 years in federal prison. I served 4 of the 12 years at a federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. When I was 26 years old, the government offered to take me out of prison on the condition I go to work for an agency of the federal government for the remainder of my sentence, or until my parole had been satisfactorily completed. I agreed and was released. This year, I'm celebrating 41 years with the FBI. I have been at the Bureau for over 4 decades. I work out of Washington, D.C. I make my home in Charleston, South Carolina. Every Monday, I commute up to Washington and home on Thursday. I live in Charleston with my one and only wife of 40-plus years and my 3 sons. My youngest boy graduated from the University of Beijing in China. He went on to get his master's degree there. He reads, writes, and speaks Chinese fluently. He designs video games for the Chinese market for an American gaming company based in San Francisco. His games in China are in their 4th generation. They're extremely popular mobile device games. My middle son graduated right here, University of Nevada in Las Vegas. His degree was in hotel administration. He and his wife own a business in South Carolina. They manage that business together. And my oldest boy, who's 38, graduated from University of Kansas at KU. He went on to Loyola School of Law in Chicago to get his law degree and pass the bar in Illinois. went on to make his dad very, very proud. He's an FBI agent. He's been in the Bureau 12 years. He supervises our task force that deals with American citizens kidnapped overseas. As many of you know, I had very little to do with the movie. I would have preferred not to have a movie made about my life. I raised my 3 sons in the same house for 25 years in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and commuted to Washington, D.C. to keep them away from just that. My neighbors didn't even know who I was. But Steven Spielberg told Barbara Walters he felt compelled to tell the world the story, not because of what I did, but because of what I'd done for my country for more than 30 years. In the end, my family and I were pleased with the film, and we thought in a couple years that would all go away. I never dreamed that Catch Me If You Can would go on to earn more than $1 billion for DreamWorks and be sold over and over on television and HBO just about every week and become a Broadway musical and then a popular TV show. But consequently, every Monday morning when I go to work, I have emails on my desk. And those emails come from all over the world every single Monday. Someone watching the play for the first time, seeing the movie on HBO for the first time. They come from people as young as 8, people as old as 80. And I'm sure that the people sending those emails figure I'll never see them, but they feel compelled to write. Some write and say, you know, you were brilliant. You were an absolute genius. I was neither. I was just a child. Had I been brilliant, had I been a genius, I don't know that I would have found it necessary to break the law in order to just simply survive. And while I know that there are people fascinated by what I did 50 years ago as a teenage boy, I've always looked upon what I did as something that was immoral, illegal, unethical, and a burden I live with every single day of my life and will until my death. There are many who write and say, well, you know, you were certainly gifted. That I was. I was one of those few children that got to grow up in the world with a daddy. Now the world is full of fathers. But there are very few men worthy of being called daddy by their child. I had a daddy who loved his children more than he loved life itself. Steven Spielberg would later write that the more I researched Frank's youth without ever having met Frank, I couldn't help but put his father in the film through the likes of Christopher Walken. My father was a man who had 4 children, 3 boys and a daughter. Every night at bedtime, he'd walk into your room. He was 6'3". He would drop down on one knee, kiss you on the cheek, pull the cover up, and he'd put his lip right up on your earlobe and he'd whisper deep in your ear, I love you very much. He never, ever missed a night. As I grew older, I sometimes fell asleep before he got home, but I always woke up the next morning, knew he had been by my bedside. Years later, my older brother shared my room with me for a while. He was 6'4", in the Marine Corps. He went on to play semi-pro football for Buffalo, but my father would walk around to his bed, hug him, kiss him, whisper in his ear he loved him. When I was 16 years old, I was just a child. All 16-year-olds are just children, much as we like them to be adults. They're just children. And like all children, they need their mother and they need their father. All children need their mother and their father. All children are entitled to their mother and their father. And though it is not popular to say so, divorce is a very devastating thing for a child to deal with and then have to deal with the rest of their natural life. For me, a complete stranger said I had to choose one parent over the other. That was a choice I could not make, so I ran. How could I tell you my life was glamorous? I cried myself to sleep till I was 19 years old. I spent every birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day in a hotel room somewhere in the world where people didn't even speak my language, and the only people that associated with me were people who believed me to be their peer, 10 years older than I actually was. I never got to go to a senior prom, high school football game, share a relationship with someone my own age. I always knew I'd get caught. Only a fool would think otherwise. The law sometimes sleeps, but the law never dies. I was caught. I went to some very bad places. My boys have grown up asking their mother, why is it Dad gets up in the middle of the night, goes down the TV room, he doesn't turn the TV on, he just sits there all night? Because there are things you can't forget, things you're not meant to forget. While I was sitting in that pitch black cell in France, my father, 57, was climbing the subway stairs of New York as he did every day. He was in great physical shape. He just happened to trip. He reached his arm out to break his fall. He slipped, hit his head on a railing, landed at the bottom of the step. He was dead. I didn't know he was dead. I was sitting there thinking about him, how much I couldn't wait to see him, hold him, hug him, kiss him, tell him how sorry I was. But I never got the opportunity to do that. I was very fortunate because I was brought up in a great country where everybody gets a second chance. I owe my country 800 times more than I could ever repay it for the opportunities it's given me these past 4 decades. That is why I'm at the FBI today, 32 years after a federal court order has expired ordering me to do so. I have turned down 3 pardons from 3 sitting presidents of the United States because I do not believe, nor will I ever believe, that a piece of paper can excuse my actions, that only in the end, my actions will. 40 plus years ago, on an undercover assignment in Houston, Texas, I met my wife. When the assignment was over, I broke protocol to tell her who I really was. I didn't have a dime to my name, but I eventually asked her to marry me, against the wishes of her parents. She did. Now, I could sit up here and tell you that I was born again. I saw the light. Prison rehabilitated me. But the truth is, God gave me a wife. She gave me 3 beautiful children. She gave me a family, and she changed my life. She, and she alone. Everything I have, everything I've achieved, who I am today, because of the love of a woman and the respect 3 boys have for their father, something I would never, ever jeopardize. There comes a time in all of our lifetimes where we grow up and we have children, and as every parent in this room knows, whether your child is 3 months old or 38 years old, when you lay your head on a pillow at night and you're just about to close your eyes, the last thing you think about, the last thing you worry about are your children. So if you still have your mother, you still have your father, you give them a hug, you give them a kiss, you tell them you love them while you can. And to those men in the audience, both young and old, I would remind you what it truly is to actually be a man. It has nothing to do with money, achievements, skills, accomplishments, degrees, professions, positions. A real man loves his wife. A real man is faithful to his wife. And a real man next to God and his country put his wife and his children as the most important thing in his life. Steven Spielberg made a wonderful film, but I've done nothing greater, nothing more rewarding, nothing more worthwhile, nothing that's brought me more peace, more joy, more happiness, more content in my life than simply being a good husband, a good father, and what I strive to be every day of my life, a great daddy. God bless you, and thanks for coming this morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, and he will make a very short 5-minute presentation, and then we'll take questions. I met Mr. Eisen about 15 years ago when he was the head of global security worldwide for American Express. After working with Mr. Eisen when he was at American Express, I came to realize that he was the most knowledgeable person I ever met when it came to cyber and cyber technology and cyber crimes. So even going rather to our laboratory at Quantico or going to our cyber lab in Washington, D.C., when I had an issue, I'd always pick up the phone and call him. He never once hesitated to answer the question. He didn't have to research it. He figured the problem out immediately. So I used to say to him, you know, you need to leave American Express because you have an amazing mind. You need to create technology to rid the world of fraud. Well, you know, I'm a young guy and I have 2 children and I make a good living here. That would be very risky. I said, I know, but life, you take a lot of risks in life to do good, better. And he called me about a year later and said to me, let me ask you this, if I leave American Express and I go out and start a business and create a technology, will you be my advisor? I said, of course I will. And he started a company called the 41st Parameter, a fraud detection technology. Within 10 years, he had 160 employees. He had sold the technology to just about every major bank in America, every major airline, from Amazon down to every retailer in the United States. And he decided that either I go public or I have to sell the company because this needs to be taken worldwide. In the end, he had an offer from MasterCard, an offer from US Bank that were higher than the offer he took, but that was from Experian, which was a lower offer. But he knew that Experian operated in 80 countries around the world and that fraud was a big concern of Experian. So he decided to sell for a lesser price to Experian and sold the company for $365 million. So naturally, being in his 40s, I assumed he was done, was all over now. But in 6 months, he called me and said, you know, I have one last thing to do before I actually retire. I need to rid the world of passwords. I know how to do it. They're stagnant. They're the root of every problem we have. I can rid the world of those passwords. He went on to explain to me that the average major bank in the United States spends about $6 million a month just resetting passwords in their call center. $6 million a month, saving that bank over $100 million if there were no need for passwords. Every audience I speak to, I just spoke to over 2,000 people in Hawaii, when I tell them that no passwords is coming, they all almost stand up and applaud. Everyone, no matter what age they are, everyone wants to see the world rid of passwords. So he started a company called TrueSona. He went out and developed the technology. Microsoft saw it, came along, gave them $10 million. And now today, TrueSona is a reality. It is the only verification technology in the world insured by an insurance company. So when a transaction is conducted by TrueSona, it's automatically insured. It cannot be beat. So in an interview when we were touring over the 41st Parameter in Hong Kong, a reporter for CNBC News asked Mr. Eisen, I know that you worked with Mr. Abagnale for a long time as your advisor, but what I want to ask you is this, Mr. Abagnale does not write code. He said, no, he doesn't write code, but I'm not a criminal. I can develop the most sophisticated technology in the world, but I can't think like a criminal. I don't know how to defeat the technology. He does. So I would say that our relationship that I have with Frank is like playing chess. I develop something, I present it to him, and he says, you have a weakness here. I could enter and do this. So I build a wall, I come back to Frank, and he goes, nope, I could still come in and do this. Until the day Frank says to me, I can't beat this technology, it can't be defeated. There is no way to access it. There's no way to circumvent it. Then I know that I have a product, and that's when I develop it, as I did the 41st, and brought it to the marketplace, and as I have with TrueSona. I'd like to show you 5 minutes demo of that technology, because that's all it takes. So please welcome Mr. Ori Eisen to the mall.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I want to start with, in conclusion, because after that opening, who can ever follow that? My agent said never follow babies, puppies, and Frank Abagnale, but clearly I don't listen. I'm about to show you the shortest demo you probably will see in Money 2020, because I don't want to just talk about technology and then we'll sit and answer some questions. We're on a mission to remove passwords from everywhere in your life. Raise your hand if you love using passwords and you want to remember them. Sir, are you raising? No, he's not raising his hand. No one. No one in this room wants passwords. So let me show you what we showed the world at Finovate, and the Money 2020 should see it too. This is a software that allows you to connect any email you use to your phone. So if you've given already your email to your bank or your healthcare company or even Netflix, instead of remembering then username and password, all you need to do is have your phone with you. Watch, this will be really quick. On the left, I'm going to show you a test page that has a button that says login with TrueSona. We also have SDKs that you can put it in your app so you don't have to use our name. This is just to demonstrate. And on the right, I'm going to open our app. Okay, so you see my phone on the right side of the screen and the web page on the left side. Watch. But to prove to you there's no trickery here, this is my camera and it's looking at you. I'm going to click login with TrueSona on the left. What I'm going to get is a one-time QR changes every 30 seconds, so you can't just grab it and send it to somebody and watch. I'm just going to point at it. It will disappear from the left to say that it was scanned. And now my phone is asking me, did you really mean to log in? And if I'll say, yes, I did, that's it. On the left, you'll see the page navigating to the logged in state, and you'll see my name on the upper left corner says, hello, Ori. Let me do it again in case you missed this. I'm going to log out. I'm going to click log in. There's going to be a one-time QR that is encrypted and sealed so hackers cannot just pretend to be this relying party. Here's my phone. I'm just going to point at it. You'll see that on the left, the screen will disappear to say it was scanned. And on the right, I'm asked, is that really you? I can still say, no, it's not me, this is a mistake. And yet, if I hit yes, accept, I'm in. That's it. Why do you need username and passwords? Now, to some of you in the audience, that this looks just too easy and simple, come see us later. This is just 5 minutes. But I'm going to show you the next level up of what Frank and I developed in case a healthcare company wants to really make sure for HIPAA compliance that it's really you versus just your phone and your email. So it wouldn't surprise you that we're in Vegas and I brought cards. Pick a card, any card. What you're looking at are 2 driver licenses. They're both real. They're both made by the state. And here's what we can do with them. Watch. I'm going to go to a very similar demo. This one is for the heightened level of security. So it will not be enough just to say, yes, it's me, but we will also ask to show your driver license or passport. Watch. I'm just going to scan the code so I never have to type in username and password so keyloggers never get them. No more. The app is asking me, hey, is that really you on the other end? And I'm going to say, yep, this is me. And this will be the good card. Okay, let me just scan it. And that one should open the door because it's the one I registered. And I've just logged in with my complete identity, name, date of birth, and all that stuff streamed right from the document to the relying party. We at TrueSona don't store the stuff because last you heard companies get breached and we don't want to be the next honeypot. So I just logged in. And in case you thought, well, I can just go to the DMV, say that I'm you, and I'll get another driver license, this guy, let me show you what happens if you'd scan with the evil twin. This is why I work with Frank, because he tells me, well, if a crook would see what you just did, that's how they would beat it. So watch. I'm going to scan it. It's going to ask me, is that really you on the other end? That's what's causing the noise. Okay. And I'm going to hit yes, this is me. And if you brought another driver license, it would simply not work because those are not the same documents. So if you want to learn more about how this works and how we're taking the world to a no password state, come see us. But right now I want to sit down and see if there's any questions in the audience about how Frank and I are collaborating and why we're on this journey to reduce the use of passwords all over the world. All right, I'm going to go sit down.
That was fabulous. So for questions, we've got Slido open, and I don't know if we're taking live questions with, doesn't look like we have a speaker. So some of the questions that are coming in are talking about the use of technology, big banks versus smaller banks, community banks, regional banks. How could some of the technology you talked about be used, and some of the learnings that you've developed used when it's not a huge company but more of a regional community?
If you don't mind, I'll answer it. When Frank and I started TrueSona, as Frank mentioned, we probably both don't have to go to work. We're doing this because we're on a mission. No one asked how much it costs, but it's free. So if you are a small company, even with one person, and you want to rid yourself of passwords, you just go download the free app of TrueSona. You get our software. It comes with Monday to Friday support, so we don't have a cost of supporting you with unlimited traffic. If you're a big bank that says, I don't want to download your app, I want to use an SDK in my app, great, and pay us $1 per user per year with unlimited use. But if we are really on this mission, our price sheet is reflected. It is completely free. So we are turning the tide on this, because right now, last we checked, the bad guys are winning, not us.
Frank, did you have any more?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we're trying to do is eliminate the whole concept of passwords, which we know are stagnant and a long time ago. They should have been, it's an old technology, should have been gone a long time ago. With this technology, it's as simple as me pulling up to the ATM machine, taking out my phone, the QR code comes up, I click it, I'm into the ATM machine, and it just asks me what I want. I'm going to make a deposit, I want to withdraw money. I don't have to enter any passwords. I don't have to have an ATM card to carry around that somebody might get and use my ATM card to access my bank account. All of those things go away. So it's a technology that I think changes the whole world in the way we operate. And I also see it as a little beyond this. I see it on the federal level of that eventually, if we are able to use TrueSona through healthcare reasons or motor vehicle or a bank, I don't need your social security number. You can keep that private to you. Now, the government will always know your social security number. They'll use it as an identifier. But when I go to buy a car, I fill a credit application. I don't have to give them my date of birth, social security number. I can TrueSonify who I am right there to the bank that's giving me that loan. I can do that to the healthcare provider. I can do that to my doctor's office. So we take away the social security number out of the public, which we obviously either need to come up with a new number or we need to stop the use of that number, certainly for the next generation, so they don't have to present that number every time they use it. So there are a lot of great things you can do with it.
So one of the questions that has come up, anybody who is a road warrior and is constantly battling with not having a charge on your phone, how do you authenticate if your phone is out of battery or you don't have it with you or your phone is compromised?
So if your phone is out of battery, you go back to what you're doing right now. You should use static username and password. The bank, on the other hand, should realize that might not be you. I'm just reading the questions here, so we'll give them quick answers. Now, what if your phone is compromised? So what I didn't show is to get to the point that I click, this is me, we either use a biometric. We are not a biometrics company, so whatever your phone has, or if it's a very old device, we use a 6-digit PIN. Just if you forget your phone here in Vegas or at an airport, no one can get to that moment to say it's you. So that's the answer to the compromise. I'll take the next one too. How do you implement the login without passwords on the mobile banking? Because you can't scan with this phone the QR. So I went really quickly, but if I were to do this demo for my phone, once I click the login button, it uses what's called deep linking that will open our app on top of it. Then it's asking you, is that you? You hit yes, and then you follow the breadcrumbs back to Safari, and it takes you into the website. So that's already embedded. I know I had only 5 minutes, so I only showed you the tip of it. If you want to come learn more, come see us, but you can do it just on your phone by use of deep linking.
Frank, what do you think about blockchain?
Excuse me, about?
What do you think about blockchain security?
Blockchain? I think I've made my comments very publicly known that I think that blockchain, unfortunately, will end up being a huge scam in the end. I've said that many times. It's a technology that I think is not as secure as that they would like you to believe. And there's very recourse once that information's gone. So I'm not a big fan of blockchain. I think blockchain knows that, but I'm not a big fan of blockchain.
I'll say I agree with Frank. I think blockchain as a technology is super cool, but that does not mean what is stored with it is correct. So the GIGO principle is garbage in, garbage out. So if I take a fake identity and seal it into a blockchain, that still does not make it right. If anything, it might be very hard to then change or expunge. So if the world was perfect without fraud, blockchain would be super, super, super amazing. Unfortunately, that on its own will not solve the problem of not knowing who's on the other end.
So Frank, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on with Aurea TrueSona. On the government side, as you all should know, of course, cyber up until this point is all about stealing money and stealing data, and of course, data is money. So it's a financial crime and a crime to steal information. We have the ability now to shut someone's pacemaker off. We test these things at Quantico in our labs constantly. We get within 35 feet of an individual. We control all the bodily devices that are on that individual. So we can assassinate them. We can speed up that device, whatever it is we care to do. But again, we're limited to 35 feet. We can pull over a vehicle, again, that we test at Quantico on our testing grounds, that we can take a vehicle and take that vehicle over. We can shut its motor off. We can turn on its airbag. We can lock the passenger in the car, shut their windows, lock their windows, and keep them in the car. But we need to speed up to within 35 feet of the vehicle in order for the officer or agent to be able to do that. I believe that within the next 3 to 5 years, you'll be able to do that from 5,000 miles away. So if you were assassinating someone from another country, you would be able to absolutely do that. If you were willing to take someone driving down the Autobahn at 80 miles an hour and turn their airbag on, you would be able to do that. So I think that cyber is going to turn a lot blacker. It's going to be much more than a financial crime, an identity stealing data crime, to a crime of taking over electrical grids, taking over and being used as a tool for war, taking over banking systems. I think the next big breach we'll see, and we'll see within a couple of years, is a breach of billions and billions of search engines so that we know what people are actually looking at. Then that becomes a tool if you're a mayor, a governor, a politician, a banker, or someone where I know everything that you look for on your computer and I can make that public unless I'm paid a ransom. Those are the kind of things that I think we'll be seeing in a short time. So cyber is going to get very scary. I'm always a big believer that we have technology to prevent these things, but if you don't use the technology, then it's worthless. So we had the technology to keep people out of Equifax. They didn't use the technology properly. They didn't fix the proper patches they should have had, and the hacker accessed it. I mentioned to Kristen earlier that I've been dealing with breaches way back to TJ Maxx, and the one thing I've learned from all these breaches is that every breach occurs because somebody in that company did something they weren't supposed to do, or somebody in that company failed to do something they were supposed to do. Hackers do not cause breaches. People do. So consequently, we can keep them out. But if we don't use the technology in place, we don't teach our people how to deal with social engineering. There is no technology, there never will be any technology that can defeat social engineering. I used it 50 years ago with a telephone to get a uniform. Today, there are all kinds of devices to use it. And if we don't teach people how to deal with social engineering, then they're going to be victimized by it. So I think a lot of these things can be prevented, but we have to use the technology that exists and the technology that will be created to prevent those things.
Well, and just talking about basic cyber hygiene, so you gave an example of technology that was there but wasn't being used. I get to share the stage quite often with Secret Service colleagues, and they'll pull out this brochure that is just very basic cyber hygiene, and they say 95% of the time that we're called into a business that's been breached, they didn't use just the basics. So to the point that you were making. The other thing is talking about strategy. So when you look at too often, and we see this in the news, the first time the CEO meets the CISO is after a breach. Whereas we were talking ahead of time on that needs to be part of the strategy up front, part of the board strategy, part of the product development, part of the life cycle, to have the cybersecurity, the anti-money laundering, the fraud in that front end piece, because it's way harder to fix it on the back end. Just emphasizing your point. Why don't we do one more, and it's biometric integration with the app.
So I'll answer. I see a lot of technical questions. So as I said, we're not a biometrics company. We use whatever the phone has. So if today it's fingerprint and tomorrow it's voice and the next day it's Face ID, we just take the APIs the OS allows us. So that is just to unlock the phone. That's not part of the TrueSona system per se. So if you leave it somewhere, no one can get to it. I see other questions about how does it integrate with the website. So SAML tokens are used, or OpenID Connect. Those are all technologies that already exist. Again, that's not what we invented. We invented a way to connect the ID to the phone and to the set of emails that you use. So the chain of together cannot just be somebody. So you cannot be me unless you have access to my emails, not know the email, but go verify an email that is sent to me, because that begins the chain reaction. And for that reason, we call the company TrueSona, which is really the fusion of True and Persona. And for all I see all the technical questions about what happens if the phone gets hacked and all that. I know we didn't get to all the technical levels. Come see us later on. We'll love to talk to you about it. But I'll end with one thing. The combined work of Frank and I on this project have led to the first company in history that got insurance, which means if we are wrong, if we make a mistake, we hand you $1 million. There is no other technology that got to that level of security. So it's almost like you shouldn't care if we were right or wrong. You'll get your money if we made a mistake. Of course, I'm making a joke out of that. But we've taken it to the highest level so far. We invite the community at large to even do better than this, because at the end of the day, we're all fighting the same enemy, which is the bad guys who want to take money and fund very evil things. And what we do every single day is fight them.
Well, thank you, and for picking your mission, executing your mission, and you gotta love the price that you shared with us. So please thank our
Thank you.